Okay, welcome back everybody. We're going to go ahead and do our second lecture for chapter 16, Evidences for Evolution, or at least the beginning of them. Last time we talked a little bit about the history of the people who came up with this idea, and today we're going to talk about fossils and rocks and stuff like that. It's going to be a good time. So, fossils consist of mineralized bone, teeth, shells, sometimes seeds, or other hard body parts. There's also trace fossils like footprints, burrows, trails, eggshells, and even feces, which we call coprolites, dinosaur poop. You might add to this leaves, trunks of trees, that kind of stuff. It's not just animals. There's also many plant fossils that are important. So, for something to be fossilized, it's kind of a tricky process. Fossilization does not happen all that often because normally when something dies, predators, scavengers, tear it apart. It decomposes in the moist environment, and the calcium and phosphate and things like that in the bones are gradually returned back to the environment. But fossilization can happen if a series of very fortunate events happens pretty quickly. As soon as this thing dies, it needs to get covered. Sediment, mud, ash, something like that, right away. So that that's kind of funny. My phone just heard what I was saying, and I think the word sediment woke up the phone and searched the rest of my sentence. Okay. Anyways, um, if they get covered by these things, and they also get covered with water, then the groundwater will fill the space in that sediment or mud, which is starting to become rock, and the minerals from that water will dissolve and replace the minerals that were in the bones of that animal. And if all of these things happen one after the other, which is very, very fortunate, then you will get a very detailed impression of exactly the shape, size of these bones in rock. Um, they can settle into impressions as well to form what's called an imprint. So you can sort of imagine perhaps like a dinosaur footprint, and that dinosaur footprint is immediately buried with sediment, buried with water, sometimes pressure, and not disturbed for a very long time, and it becomes rock. Now, I've seen a lot of footprints in the woods, but I've never seen any of them become fossils. So it takes the right circumstances. Sediments accumulate over the site. Those will exert a lot of pressure, and pressure can transform these remains into rock. Now, as this is a class that's for young Christians, um, you might find this not that disturbing actually. Something needs to die quickly. It needs to be covered by sediment. Water is preferred as well as sediment. It also needs to be under a lot of pressure. You might be thinking to yourself, perhaps Noah's flood fits the bill. Um, flood in the book of Genesis, a lot of things are going to die. They'll also be buried in mud because the whole earth was flooded, and because they're buried under mud and water, there's also going to be significant amounts of pressure. So, I don't know, I mean, maybe it's not that bad. So, there's how fossils are made. So, the painfully ironic thing about fossils for an evolutionary worldview or a naturalist worldview is they happen to be found in the only type of rock that we cannot scientifically date. Even though the other methods are riddled with assumptions, there are scientific methods, measurable, repeatable, pretty decent actually, methods of dating rock that was formed from lava, or dating rock that was formed by, something else, cooling magma or pressurizing some other type of rock or something like that. The only type of rock you cannot date is when a bunch of little particles of sand are compressed together in sediment and become a rock. And that's the only kind of rock where we find fossils. And so, of course, this is a huge pain in the neck for evolutionists, and I don't know what it is for creationists, but there you have it. Um, they have to date the rock above it and below it, or they have to date the fossil of the dead animal, dinosaur, based on other fossils that came before or after that animal from an evolutionary worldview, which are dated by the rocks above and below them. And so what you get is a circular reasoning where the sedimentary rock is dated by the fossil is dated by the sedimentary rock, and the only thing they have in common is a proposed evolutionary timetable. So I'm not saying that to insult it. It's the best method we have. Creationists admit there's a problem. Evolutionists admit there's a problem. They're going off the best information that they have. I'm not trying to knock them for it. It's just the way it works. So sedimentary rock is formed from silt, sand, or even ash when it washes down rivers to the sea. These layers on the seafloor harden into rock. Again, I can't stop thinking about the Genesis flood, but maybe you can. Geologic processes can lift and expose rock to erosion by water or wind, and then these features of this rock provide clues to the environment at the time a given layer was formed. For example, if you see a lot of fossils of ferns and fern-like plants, we know that ferns require water to successfully reproduce. So if you find a layer of rock and it's full of ferns and fern spores, then you might think to yourself, when this rock was laid down, the climate was pretty warm and pretty wet, because that's where ferns do best. Something along those lines. So here's an example of some evidence of ancient life. Well, it's not actually living, never mind. Here's an example of a really cool rock. It's called banded iron. Look at that thing. This is cool looking. It's a unique formation with striped appearance. It is the source of most iron mined today. And the idea is this: at the time this rock was formed, the ocean water contained a lot of reduced iron because the iron could not become oxidized. The oxidized iron would only start to become oxidized when there was oxygen in the ocean. And the idea is that it took millions of years for the ocean to become populated with photosynthetic bacteria and perhaps even very primitive algae that would make an oxygen-rich environment in the ocean. And as that oxygen-rich environment in the ocean started to oxidize the iron, it started to become more soluble in the water and settle out, and then we no longer find this very, very cool rock because we think historically it couldn't be formed anymore once we got enough photosynthetic organisms living and working in the ocean. It became oxidized. So let's see how close I was. Oxygen is released into the ocean by photosynthetic bacteria. It combined with iron. The resulting compounds were insoluble. It formed layers on the ocean floor. It compacted into banded iron formations. So there you have it. That's the reason we have rocks with really cool stripes like this. Alright, so let's take a look at the fossil record, because rocks are neat, but that rock we just looked at, no fossils. Nothing in it that says anything was alive. We just look at the iron, we make an assumption, and we put it in a textbook. It's fine, it's no big deal, but it's not great. Let's get a fossil. Those are more great. We've discovered fossils of more than 250,000 known species, which is crazy. That's a huge number. Many millions more probably existed, maybe, I don't know. I wasn't there, I'm only 27. um, we just haven't found the fossils, maybe. The reasons fossils are relatively rare: the organism has to fossilize before it decomposes or was eaten, which is pretty much almost never the case. And some organisms are made of mostly soft parts, which means there's not much to fossilize. Um, I don't know if I'm in love with the second point, to tell you the truth, because thanks to this country called China, we actually have a lot of fossils of soft body structures. Really soft, like pollen spores, quality softness, that have been fossilized. So I don't know. Go with it if you want to go with it. Oh, cool pictures. Look at that. Two types of sedimentary rock. Oh, they're nice. Very nice. Yeah, I like that. Old clay or mud. Beautiful. Here's a couple people climbing the walls of this awesome canyon in Italy to look for fossilized fungal spores. Nothing more exciting than a fossilized fungal spore. 251 million years old. Layer of sedimentary rock. Pretty cool. Trilobite. Everyone loves trilobites. Plenty of those in South Dakota. Ancient marine relative of the centipede, found in shale formation. We have shale here as well in South Dakota, by fossil hunters in Yoho National Park. Very cool. Why not? Alright, so now we're going to talk about radiometric dating. This is a cool idea. Even if you don't agree with the numbers, it's a really cool idea. Basically, radioisotopes decay at a constant rate. This is something we can measure in chemistry. This measurement gives us a half-life, time for one half of the atoms in the radioisotope sample to decay. So you go through one half-life, you have 50% of the original. You go through a second half-life, you have 25% of the original. On and on and on it goes, smaller and smaller and smaller samples. So here's the idea. We start with an assumption of the parent isotope percentage in what we should find in newly formed rock. Now, we could kind of argue that maybe this is or is not so good because there's some arguments that they did this with Mount St. Helens and got very, very, very old rock that we knew was just formed 20 years ago. But basically, you make this assumption that the newly formed rock is 100% parent isotope. And as it starts to age, it has 50% parent isotope and 50% daughter isotope. That's these black dots here. And so that gives us an idea of how many half-lives it's gone through. As it continues to age, now we're down to that 25% parent, 75% daughter. We've gone through 2 half-lives. On and on and on and on and on it goes. So it gives you an idea of how recent or how old that rock kind of is. And just to be fair, the measurement of the radioactive decay is not something I'm trying to argue. I think that's really cool. So, finding the age of a volcanic rock. So you have magma, the magma cools, the minerals crystallize, they harden into a rock. Each of these minerals has a different structure and composition. If you're curious about them, go to the School of Mines and Technology Geology Museum. It's free. There are many, many, many types of rocks. And if rocks are your thing, you can be pretty geeky there for free. Example, zircon crystals contain some uranium, but no lead. And we know that uranium atoms will decay into lead. And so the ratio of uranium to lead can be pretty precisely measured. And so we can calculate how long ago the crystal was formed. Kind of makes sense? If there's lots of lead, but not much uranium, it's gone through quite a few half-lives. If it's mostly uranium and really no lead, stuff's pretty much brand new. That's the idea. So we can also do the same thing with carbon-14 and carbon-12. When this Nautilus was alive, it had both carbon-14 and carbon-12 isotopes. The carbon atoms were part of the organic molecules in the animal's food. Carbon-12 is very stable, 6 protons, 6 neutrons, that's where you get the 12. Carbon-14 decays, but the proportion of the two isotopes in the tissues remain the same because the Nautilus continues to gain both types from its food. So once it dies, it stops eating, so the body stops gaining carbon. The carbon-12 are stable, but the carbon-14, these red dots, are decaying into nitrogen. So over time, the carbon-14 decreases relative to the amount of carbon-12. After 5,000 years, half of the carbon-14 is decayed. After another 5,000 years, half of what's left is decayed, and we can measure the 14 and the 12 and use the ratio to figure out about how many half-lives have gone past, and then we can use that to figure out how long this thing has been dead. So if we have 1/8 of the original ratio, we must have gone through 3 half-lives. 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 goes 2 to 4 to 8. Must have passed since it died, so 3 half-lives, you take your 5,700 multiply it by 3, and you say he's ballpark 17,000 years old. And of course, that's how you would do one of those calculations. Not too terribly bad. And it is interesting. So, the other thing that this is kind of a tough topic, but the idea of missing links. Fossils can help fill in missing links in understanding how species evolve. And for a long time, and even today, I would argue, there was a lot of disagreement in the department of whales and like dolphins, porpoises, those sorts of things, because these guys are mammals. Like they give live birth, they give their young milk. They even breathe air and have lungs instead of gills, but they're completely aquatic. And so, from an evolutionary worldview, you're like, what the heck is this thing? What a nightmare. Um, how did you go back to the water, weird mammal? Because life came from the water, and through, intermediate fossils like Tiktaalik rosea, we know that, from the water, the fishes grew legs, and then the legs onto the land, and the land, adaptive radiation. Why, why would a mammal, which took so long to evolve, go back into the ocean over millions of years? And so whales became a huge pain in the hind end for a lot of scientists. And so what we found is a lot of intermediate fossils that might help answer that question. Some of these fossil finds illustrate gradual changes in our skeletal features, like the intermediate forms of cetaceans. Those are whales, porpoises, that kind of stuff. And what they're able to find is a couple of fossils of animals that used to be alive and aren't anymore to our knowledge that had jaw bones that were very similar to our modern day whales and porpoises, but they had little tiny ankle bones. And so they're like, there we go. It's the transition from our terrestrial life back to our aquatic life. And maybe that has a picture of it. It does. Awesome. So here we have the proposed transition back into the water of Elomeryx, which is this little terrestrial animal about 30 million years ago between friends, give or take, a member of the same artiodactyl group, so even-toed, hooved mammals. So let me think. Camels, hippopotamus, um, I think antelope. I mean, just all of these guys. I don't know. That gave rise to these modern representatives. And so the idea is that like this guy, some of his population or population very similar to him would go on to become hippopotamus and everything else with even-toed hooves, and some of his population would pretty much be running through shallow water, chomping at fish and eating stuff from the water. And over the process of how many years? Let's take a peek, shall we? 30 million, 47, 17. Okay. After about 17 million years of this process of this population running through the shallow water, chomping at fish, he's going to become a little better adapted at swimming, or at least an animal very like him will. This guy's name is whatever that is. An ancient whale, 47 million years ago, has distinctive ankle bones that are evidence of a close evolutionary relationship to artiodactyls. They have a double pulley shape of a bone that forms the lower part of their ankle joint. So this guy would actually be older than this guy. This guy, older than this guy. So let's keep working back. 37 million years ago. So we were at 47 and 30. Okay, so these are our intermediates, right? Fair enough. Dorudon atrox, ancient whale, 37 million years ago. Here's its tiny artiodactyl-like ankle bones. They're too small to support its weight, so we are thinking he is probably fully aquatic, swimming mostly with his tail. If you've ever seen a crocodile swim, you pretty much get the idea. And then this is our modern whale bone, skeleton of a modern whale, sperm whale. And here is the jaw that we're seeing is so very similar, I guess. And Right down here are the tiny remnants of the pelvis and leg, but no ankle bones. So, yeah, this guy, over time, the leg bones, as they're not being used, become smaller, and next thing you know, you got a sperm whale. So, pretty cool, I guess. Let's stop there, and we'll talk about continents and changing seas here in a little bit. So next time we come back, I don't know, I'll try to find maybe there's a cool video that more succinctly explains the evolution of whales, dolphins from land animals. I'm not very good at it. Sorry about that. Anyways, thanks for your time.